Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Reacting Reddit. Today, we're going to be talking about writing advice. I'm going to be looking at these comments to this question by Sari and Auntie. What is the worst writing advice you ever received? And I already looked at these comments and sorted them and went through ones that are beneficial. So I just pulled out ones that have something constructive to say, and I'm going to try my best to help communicate the lesson that comment is trying to portray. Are you guys ready? Ah, fuck. Well, I'm gonna go ahead anyway. Alright, first comment is by Nisongoya. Nisongonya. I mess up usernames so much. But their advice is, any advice that states an absolute, such as passive voice is bad, adverbs or adjectives are bad, non-generic dialogue tags are bad. I think most writing advice should be taken as guidelines or considerations. And I think taking them as rules is what makes them bad advice. Good advice should take a paragraph of explanation. I think, not a sentence. All right. Valid point there. A lot of these comments were just sentences that weren't constructive, so I totally agree there. And their point really is that you can't look at it black and white, and any kind of advice that just says never do this, always do this, might not necessarily work in your situation. It maybe is something that works in most situations, or not most situations. There's tons of things people think work a lot, but actually don't, right? So that's what they're going for. Just trying to point out, it's not as simple as always this, always that. Just take things with a grain of salt, right? Next advice says, in software, we have a term of art that I think writers would benefit from. Something that is bad practice when used unselfconsciously is called an anti-pattern. I think of adverbs, etc. as anti-patterns, but that doesn't mean they're completely off limits. Yeah, so this gets at the point that whenever you write, you want to be writing with purpose because you're deciding to write about that. Like, describe a scene, talk about a setting, describe a sensation or a feeling or a conflict because you have a purpose to describe it for some reason, not because you're just doing it, right? It's going to be better if you do things with purpose instead of in reaction to, right? Next advice says, one of the best lessons I learned in college was from a writing professor. And it was, master these rules, only so you know how to break them. That goes along with the earlier concept of the advice has to be kind of deep. It can't just be black and white because how are you going to know if it's relevant to you or not? Because if it's not relevant, then it's not going to help you. Next advice says, good advice should take a paragraph of explanation, I think, not a sentence. You're literally doing the same thing. Good advice should take as much space as it needs. Not more, not less. Sometimes you only need one word. Sometimes you need a paragraph. Well, I think with this commenter is missing the point that it's like if you're looking at people who are trying to get educated and learn how to become better writers, having a 3-word answer to them, the chance of that actually helping them is pretty minimal. Whereas if you write, 2 or 3 sentences of meaningful, useful advice that's not snarking comments or attacks, then it's like, that's really useful. So they're just pointing out that it's more useful to go more into depth about the really good advice, not just be like, don't ignore this or do this. Film Gorilla says, technical advice always seems to be bad. Each person has their own style, and limiting them in any way doesn't work. The best advice I've heard usually involves the process workflow of writing, or is simply something motivational that can keep you going. Oh, I vibe with that. Not as a writer, but just in life. Like, yeah, that's how I feel about it too. Like, totally. People just act like, oh, it's this way or that way. It's this or that. And the reality is we live in a gray world and things are confusing. And ultimately, you just got to wake up every day and work at it and make your future better every day. Even if you only do it for an hour every single day, eventually that work will catch up to you and you'll have a better life. It's better than nothing. Trust me. You don't have to commit to 8 hours. Don't worry about that. Don't follow that work all day, work hard, change your life's narrative. Follow the focus on what you love, do it every single day, focus on making your future better narrative. Yeah? Next advice about writing, to get back on topic, is Dies by Distagnac. An author can only give you a peek into their toolkit. The burden is mostly on the person hearing it to think, okay, I'm going to try that. Or, for me, that will be an ironclad rule. Or, nah, that's not for me. Yeah. He's just pointing out that, you can't just follow these things blindly, as people have said earlier. You have to learn about the available advices and then develop your opinion on them, so that you get to a point where when you start hearing about writing advice, it's like, oh, I've heard that before, I feel this way about that. I've heard that argument before, I feel this way about that. I've heard this argument too, and I feel that way about that. Because you did all that stuff in the past, or in your case, maybe now. Next advice is by Goggy McGogger. Are you sure this person wasn't simply trying to get the student to challenge traditional conventions in literature? Pretty much every Lit 101 first day lesson is 95% dialogue and action, 5% exposition. People pay attention to the accepted norms, and sometimes they need to break free of that. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you do. If it works, it's acceptable. Same goes for any art form. If we had to follow the rules, we'd never have popular art, graphic novels, or every other form of popular music since jazz. A classroom is a microcosm of society. It must be depressing to teach a room full of rule followers and by-rote drones. If I were to teach, I'd tell my class that the only way to be great is to quit school and take up boxing. Of course, the advice you received may have been specifically intended for the listener. Suppose the student leaned too heavily on dialogue and was very weak with exposition. It's like tying one right hand behind their back so that they are forced to strengthen the left. Just playing devil's advocate here. No intention to suggest the advice isn't bad. Context is just important. Next advice by Jaded. I'm trying to remember which writer said pretty much go to dialogue as a last resort, which is the opposite of the previous comment. Henry James? E.M.? Forster? In any case, one clear sin of many a beginner are long columns of bare dialogue. Let's be honest, a good story, dialogue does not predominate. Let's be clear here. Are you suggesting that I'm misquoting Forster? I'm more certain it's Forster than James. Realize that I wasn't offering advice, nor is the advice inconsistent with there being a lot of dialogue. The point was being made that many good writers do a lot of scene setting before anyone talks. An editor once told me that he hated when stories opened with dialogue. And there can be a lot of action and description while people talk. The other problem is that there are certain things that dialogue can't do, unless it's dreadful, boring, expository dialogue. Even a story with a lot of dialogue needs a lot of other stuff. You can't use conjunctions at the beginning of a sentence, but they are wrong. And I use them all the time if necessary. Or at least I do when I feel like it. And not always all at once like this. Water Tribe says, there's actually not anything grammatically incorrect with starting a sentence with a conjunction. Elementary teachers teach that rule because kids tend to leave out a verb or write incomplete sentences when they start a sentence with a conjunction. I went to the carnival, but not the store. And later in life, no one bothers to tell you it is completely fine grammatically to start a sentence with a conjunction. So we have a lot of adults who believe that it's a real rule and not just one to help kids make full sentences when they're first learning the rules of writing. Source, I'm an English teacher. I remember learning that in elementary school, specifically because. I also remember being a huge smartass and giving the teacher an example of a proper sentence starting with because. She then came over to me and said I was right, but not everyone was smart enough to be able to do it. I had a bit of an ego problem when I was younger. Her saying that to me did not help matters any. By-Ethan Fox says, advice to remove adverbs. Yeah, I agree with this one. Adverbs are to be avoided where they take away from the writing, but they exist because they're way too quickly describe an action. There are occasions where they're acceptable. Again, black and white advice. Take stuff like that with a grain of salt, right? That's why this person's saying avoid adverbs if possible. I'll interject with comments and add my own comment here, right? I'm not commenting on this guy. I'm being like, hey, this is the most formative teaching or experience I had with a teacher in my whole life. And I dropped out of school, then dropped out of college, then never went back and did my own stuff. So I didn't exactly spend a whole lifetime or a long, long time in school. That being said, I can share my most memorable experience with a teacher, and it was an English teacher. And he completely blew my mind. It was when I was going to college, right? And prior to that, all my English classes, they taught you a lot of big fancy words. They taught you a lot of, like, the goal was kind of like, okay, you need to write a 2,000 word paper. So you put a lot of flowery bullshit into it. And ultimately, what I didn't know is that that makes your message less clear. It's like there's this way of like educated readers who like using big words and understanding what big words mean, and they feel smart when they use big words, and they like it when other people don't understand their big words. But then I had this college teacher, and every student's essay, the first essay who was handed back, he crossed out 2/3 to 90%, so 70 or 66% to 90% of the words that were written. Right? And the crazy fucking part was that all of our essays still made sense, right? And that was such a powerful lesson, because that was ultimately the focus of that whole year of his class, was that you can put a lot of words into something and talk about it a lot, but that doesn't mean that people are going to understand the picture you're painting in your head. And if you don't understand how the rest of the world reads and understands things, and how little context they have compared to how much you have in your head, then you're always going to struggle to write effectively and communicate to people, because people don't give about reading the content that you're writing, because they don't relate to it, right? And it's too hard for them to understand. It's too flowery. There's too much back and forth. There's too much unnecessary words that don't add excitement or meaning to your writing. So that was a turning point for my life. Now when I write and when I make content where I'm editing and stuff, I ask myself, is this necessary? What purpose does it serve? Is there a purpose? If not, it shouldn't be there. And you kind of want to write that way as well. And it takes time to be able to, but it's a bad habit from my perspective and my teacher's perspective, who convinced me of this, that to meet a word count, unless you're trying to get in the habit of writing, then that's a great thing. But normally, if you're just writing and in your head you're just trying to meet a word count, you may not need 2,000 words to properly express your argument. And the reality is, to get it to 2,000 words, you need to deepen your argument. But that's not what people do, is it? We just add words to fluff it up. We shallow and generalize the argument. Quite funny. Moving on, that was my comment. All right, comment by Gull, done. Snow Princess Elsa says, write what you know. I've made it a goal in life to write what I know, not what is already in my head. Oh, no, I misread that. I've made it a goal in my life to write what I want to know, not what is already in my head. McZerky says, I've been told, know what you need to, and never less. I think that's a good starting point. You know, I actually agree with the write what you know idea, or at least my interpretation of it. I take it to mean draw from your knowledge and experiences, which I think is important to make writing feel honest. I also don't think that advice means you have to know everything when you start writing, but that it's worthwhile to research what you don't know at some point before you are published. So, for example, my book is about magic existing in our real world. Obviously, I can't know what that's like, but I can use my knowledge of how people respond to supernatural events to inform my writing. I also have scenes that involve technology and medicine that I'm not familiar with. I've taken some time to research how these issues should be handled in our world, or would be handled, to decide the changes that magic would make. I don't literally know how healing magic works, but I feel that grounding my writing in reality makes it more believable and relatable. Absolutely! That is great advice, because even there's some comments here that are like, yeah, no, you can't write what you know and what's real, because I write about dragons and fantasy, and of course none of that's real, so everything I know is irrelevant. And no, that's not true. You're a human writing to other humans, and as a writer, you're trying to do things in a way where other people relate to what you're talking about. So it's very relevant that you're a human. Even if you're talking about a dragon experience, why do people care about the dragon? What's the dragon guarding? Why do they want to kill him? Why do they want to save him? Who are your friends? Why do you care about the friends? Why are you able to convince people to go try and kill a dragon? That means, are these people dumb? Like, are you a scam artist? Are you a con artist? What's your problem, you know? Like, there's a lot that you can get into that is relevant to the human experience in our world. And actually, if you look at a fantasy book, even something like Lord of the Rings, you could argue that most of the experiences, the emotions people feel, are totally possible in our real world, and not only totally possible, but happen regularly. Like Gollum, for example. Super jealous dude. Super jealous. Is there a ring that makes you invisible? No. Are there objects that people crave and ruin their lives obsessing about? Absolutely. Have some creativity, guys. Come on. This comment by Baby Puncher Bob. Ooh, Bob. Mature characters and stories are gray characters and stories. A reply to that by Shel Steiner. Oh my god, yes. This new bizarre trend of only liking stories if they have you not sure if you should support one person or the other, or hope they all get shot and dumped in a ditch together. For the benefit of all, it's so exhausting. I get enough of that in real life and enjoy reading and watching fiction with clearly aligned characters. Of course, flat, flawless characters are boring as well, but you can still be flawed character or even occasionally do terrible things and still be overall good. Like Harry Dresden or El Loliot from Death Note. Both get up to some horrible things and have occasionally questionable actions or motivations, but they unquestionably, they are who you ought to be rooting for. Peon says, the same with every villain is the hero of their own story. Some characters can be just evil. I like the depth of stories that imagine that their villain believes they're the hero, because that's more realistic. That's how people work in life. You don't have people who are like, haha, hello, I am the most evil person. That is who I am. That's what I identify with, and I aspire to do evil things in my life. That's not really how it works. People don't identify as evil. You, are perceived as evil by other people, right? So that's why in one way evil people don't so much really exist. People just do evil things, basically. Bithmark says, these 10 tips from authors you've never heard of helped me turn my unpublished resume into a better unpublished resume. D. Flovett says, this isn't exactly answering your question, but in college, a friend of mine and I got to hang out with a real published writer. It was pretty exciting, and my friend had quite a few drinks. The writer told us the classic advice of write drunk, edit sober. However, my friend remembered it, write sober, edit drunk, which really is not advice that works. I can think of a few less effective practices than editing drunk. The Alpaca Lives says, also, reading your genre equips you to recognize what readers are expecting, to better prepare you to invert or play with them. Otherwise, you are likely to think you've written an amazing twist, which a frequent reader of the genre will see coming from a mile off. Being able to read your own drafts the way a reader will, not as you see them as an author, is a critical skill in the endless redrafting stage. And a writer who hasn't read much, or not much of the kind of thing he's trying to write, isn't prepared to do that. This advice by Wolfgang Silva. From American Public Education. 1. A paragraph consists of 5 sentences. The first is your introduction. It is then followed by 3 details about the subject. Finally, you wrap up the paragraph with a conclusion. A properly constructed paragraph is imperative to writing. 2. Your sentences must always follow the rigid formaic patterns of a subject, a verb, indirect objects, direct objects, etc. 3. Don't write about things that make people uncomfortable. Nobody will want to read that. I don't want to read about it, so I am giving you a D on this assignment. 4. Write only what you know. If you're a boy, you can only understand what it's like to be a boy, and your writing from the perspective of anything else will never be convincing. Ha! This person's old school and doesn't know how the real new modern era works. Because there's a bunch of really famous authors, and a lot of them, the main character is the opposite sex of, yeah. And there's also tons of really popular music that is just like, it sounds really genuine and true, but it's just an artist who thought of a person in a situation and was like, what would that person feel like? And they made a song about it. Welcome to the world, my friends. Brian 610, that last point is hilarious. I've been told my best stories are from the female perspective, not the male one. Also, J.K. Rowling is a female writing Harry Potter from a male perspective. Enough said. D.T. Mintz said, the Sanderson's sliding scales of protagonist qualities. Likeable, proactive, and competent. High levels of one can cancel out the absence of another, but you don't want all 3 too high or too low. This is why you can get away with House and Walter White and Rorschach. Unlikable bastards. But they're either really good at what they do or really driven to go after what they want. Beef Tank says, I remember being taught in college that opening a story or a chapter with dialogue was one of the worst things that you can do because it removes all context and scene from the dialogue, so the reader has no idea where to place it. Hubris Hero says, write a shitty story first. Wait 6 months without looking at it. Open it back up. Revise it to make it good. Waste of damn time. They say that's the advice. Well, it depends what your goal is. If your goal is to write a hugely successful monetary story, yeah, okay, maybe that's not it. But if your goal is to get into the habit of writing when you've never written before and you don't think you could ever write a book and you don't even think it would be possible for you to write that much, well, showing yourself it's possible for you to write that much and write every day for a month might be a fantastic, great, amazing way to do it. Brass Otter says, it entirely depends on your perspective. You can learn a lot in 6 months. It might not be publication worthy, but if you write a story and then bench it for 6 months and come back to edit it, you can see how you've grown in that time span, what needs work, etc. Parva Ovis says, I came here to say that. Know what you write. It's pretty fantastic advice compared to the inverse. You're writing a story about the intricacies of this niche hobby you have? Great. You already know the ins and outs of it. You have this idea for a character with a wildly different background and life story than what you're familiar with? Go ahead, but research every little detail so that you know what you're doing. You want to write about space dragons? Yeah, they're fictional. But you still have to be the expert on them because you're the one coming up with them in the first place and trying to make them relatable. Maybe the very first person who said that meant it in a good way. Like, don't write about something you don't understand. Even if you are totally making it up, you should know exactly how that works before you start trying to explain it to other people. And since then, simple-minded people have taken it to mean don't try and out yourself in other people's shoes, and expand your readers and your own world. Shushane Chowdhury says, when I was about 10 years old, my parents put me in a writing class. The instructor insisted that we could never use the word said. I understood that we were supposed to find other words like stated, replied, etc. But basic vocabulary is the last thing that you want to remove from your writing. Doc's Writer of Steel says, A Redditor once advised me to share all of my writing ideas from my notebooks online, particularly in Reddit. Because what's the point of having them if you're not going to share them? I felt a little offended, to be honest. Reetbot says, I did NaNoWriMo. Now I'm going to go with NaNoWriMo. I did NaNoWriMo one year, just to see if I could actually write 50,000 words in a month, which I did manage. I never thought it would improve my writing, or that I would be creating great art. The best thing about it was that I got to write a novel-length story, which I had never done before. Also, the people who read my story liked the relationship between the two main characters and said it was realistic. However, like you have indicated, there are many downsides to this challenge. I would spend a paragraph describing a door just so I could get my word count up. Sometimes I would repeat arguments my characters made just because I wasn't sure what to write next. I didn't really know where my story was going, so my draft is filled with all these mini plots that really have no relevance to the main plot. Overuse of adverbs, countless other things that I am sure anyone else would be able to see if they had read my story. Overall, while I did like the challenge of participating in NaNoWriMo, the drawbacks of doing so far outweigh any positives. As a nanoer, I pretty much agree. I think nano can be useful for motivation in drafting a piece if you balance the quality and quantity focus, which is how I try to use it. But the way you're supposed to do it is kind of bonkers. My first nano, I wrote a page of useless, rambling dialogue for the sake of word count. That doesn't do any freaking good. Well, yeah, that's if you're used to being in the habit of writing and you expect, I could totally just write every day for a month, no problem. But what if you want to be able to be like that? What if you want to be a person who can write every day, but you don't, and you want to write more? Might be a great option. Gut-founded Regal says, write what you know. That was terrible advice. Writers create imaginary worlds, and they must practice lots to get good at it. I learned early on that when I wrote about only what I knew, it bored me. If I was bored, my readers would be bored. This is another example of people taking context and different ways to interpret something. Because the argument, like, this person kind of contradicts themselves, because they say that write what you know is bad advice. And then the sentence, writers create imaginary worlds, and they must practice lots and lots to get good at it. So writers create imaginary worlds, and eventually they get really good at writing imaginary worlds. And when they're really good, they're writing about what they know, which is imaginary worlds, right? So it's like weird. They're saying that's bad advice, but their advice is that advice, you know? It's a bit off-putting there. I think what they're trying to go for, though, is that you should really, like, experiment and practice, you know, and focus on what is relevant to what makes you feel emotion. What do you feel interested in? What do you feel that you, for some reason, like, you know, feel is relevant? What do you feel excited by? These kind of things. In a sense, you should write what your feelings know, what your feelings show you, what you've learned through your feelings. Write about these. Whereas don't launch a product that's about something that you've written a lot about that you don't know a lot about. That's what write what you know is supposed to mean. It can be taken other ways, where imagine you don't know what to write, you can't get in the habit of writing. Well, maybe you're trying to write about the wrong things. You're trying to write about things you don't care about. So you need to look at something you care about and you're interested in and you're already reading about, or you're already learning about, or you're already watching videos about, or talking to people about. And write about that instead, something more relevant to you. Write what you know. You know? You can swing a lot of these sentences in a lot of different ways to teach a lot of different things. Larissa Faye says, write what you know. Excuse you, but you don't look like a wizard to me, so why aren't you following your own advice? I'm pretty sure the saying is supposed to mean, do your research before writing, and should really be, write what you know, research what you don't. Regardless, it's ridiculous to hear, and it doesn't help. I don't need to become an astrophysicist in order to write about one. I need to research it in order to write it well. It's like saying, eat healthy and lose weight without telling people what healthy is. How? Cesarade says, my big problem years ago was knocking the character unconscious to change the scene because of cliches I'd seen in some kids' books. If a real person got knocked cold that frequently, they'd have intense brain damage. For reference, if a real person gets knocked cold once, they're likely to have brain damage. Chilari says, did you used to write for BBC's Merlin? Because that's my biggest gripe with that show. The way they contrived for Merlin to do magic to save Arthur's life without Arthur finding out Merlin was a wizard? No wonder he was a king who never fulfilled his destiny. He was permanently concussed. Give them a life-threatening illness. It was told to me when I was asked how I could make a character more interesting. That one was funny. Goggy McGogger says, readers have to like your protagonist. And never kill a dog or a child on the first page. Sometimes I forget that the point of this, the point of this advice is bad advice, right? So anybody who says this, a person who says readers have to like your protagonist, is saying that that's bad advice. They're not counting it as advice. It's funny. Dandy Flowers says, this reminds me of House of Cards for obvious reasons. The opening of that show was so brutally effective and instantly had me hooked. If they followed that advice, I probably would never have gotten into it. Advice that says that theme is something to avoid thinking about. It'll just come out naturally in the writing. Huh, hell no. I need theme before I can write a single word. I don't write unless I have a reason to say. Fitzmati says that you have to write every day and have to put in X amount of time before your writing isn't total crap, and or that you have to be a professional writer to have any worth. It's not that experience isn't a very good thing, or that it doesn't usually take people a lot of bad writing before anything good comes out of them, or that there's anything at all wrong with treating writing as a profession. But that advice is a great way to dissuade people from trying it in the first place. And then who knows what the world misses out on, not to mention the fact that the writer themselves misses out on the joy of creation, even if what they create is only good to themselves. And besides, who's to say the first thing someone writes isn't all-time gold? It's certainly happened before. So let's not give advice that keeps people from even trying. Amen. Let's not give advice that keeps people from even trying. You know, let's not even just keep it at that way. Let's you, listener to this, and me, let's commit to not mirror or to not share stories or random crap we hear from other people, random opinions other people have. Let's not share them when they just unnecessarily keep people from trying. Because if you look online, if you try and learn anything, if you try and do anything, if you try and learn how to play the guitar, if you try and learn how to sing, or if you try and learn how to write, you're going to be told you can't a lot. And you're going to have to deal with that. And the world's going to put you down. And people and society, and worst of all, the voice of society in your own head is going to come up with every single possible reason for you to be judged and come to the conclusion that this isn't possible. You can't do it. The time is not now. But you're wrong. They're wrong. You can do it. You just have to get at it. Doesn't matter if you didn't do it for 60 years. Georgia O'Keeffe started painting vaginas when she was like 91, and she's a famous flower painter. I meant to say flowers. They just look like vaginas. But I realized that some of you might not know who they are and think that she just paints vaginas, and that's not who she was. But she started painting when she was way older than any of you, so come on. Let's get at it. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe and drop us a like or comment, or check out other videos before doing so. And if you want to make this kind of content, also if you want to make thumbnails or videos where you use content online to form your own videos and insert memes and all that kind of fun, jazzy stuff, like watch this. Boom! Ha ha ha! I can put memes in my video with the touch of a button. See, Obama's like, why? Why would that matter? I don't care. And then now I can be like, boom! Simon's judging me, right? It's useful, and you can do cool stuff with videos when you have a useful tool, when you got programmer people by your side working with you to make content easier to produce and reduce the barrier to entry and the sheer scale of time it takes to make edited videos. So we're looking out for more content creators. So if you're one of those people, or you know one of those people, please reach out to us. Go to our About page and grasp our email out of that CAPTCHA code in the For Business Inquiries section and send us an email saying hello, because we want to have a Zoom call with you. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Ciao.